Well everyone, it's time for us to go ahead and take a look at the Google Pixel 4a and see how this phone holds up in 2023. Now, one thing I will definitely tell you about the Pixel 4a is that this was a very good phone that Google made many years ago. I think it was a very smart choice for them to go and make a device like this. If they were to go and continue on the same road that they were doing before, I don't really know if a lot of people would end up buying those types of phones. If we look at the Google Pixel 4, I think it was kind of hit or miss. I think a lot of people liked it, some other people didn't, but the Pixel 4a unanimously was a pretty good phone that a lot of people actually ended up, kind of buying. And the reason for this, if you kind of think about it, was because of the drop in price tag and a change in strategy. So if you want to pick up the Pixel 4a or maybe some other phones I would recommend this year, links will be down in the description. You can get them from there and you can help support the channel at the same time. Now, starting off with the outside, the Pixel 4a came out in 2020 and it was a successor to the Pixel 3a. So the 3a came out a year before this, and I definitely do think the Pixel 4a was a good successor coming from the 3a series. So on the front of the Pixel 3a, this phone visibly, at least with the design on the front, looked better than all the other previous Pixels, in my opinion. It had a hole punch display, which was the first time we saw a hole punch display on any Pixel phone, and also this was like a $300 phone at that time. That was crazy for that price tag to be giving us this type of capability. And it was a 60Hz panel, so it wasn't anything crazy, but it was a really decent phone and a decent panel at that time. And even when I look at this phone now, it is actually pretty crazy to me of how good of a job Google did, at that time. Now we do have, it's a good panel. There's nothing else to kind of think about here. On the bottom, you do have the USB-C port, which is great, and you have a headphone jack on this phone too. Now when you think about that capability right there, again, it is actually pretty insane when you kind of think about having USB-C and a headphone jack on a budget tier phone. It may seem pretty popular now, but at that time in 2020, about 2.5 years ago, it didn't really seem like, Google would make a phone of this caliber during that time, even though they did do it with the 3A. But when you mix that with the display and the way it looks, it was crazy to me. Now on the back, we do have this plastic back, so the phone is primarily built out of plastic. So that is pretty much the main disadvantage you're getting with this phone. But again, when you wrap that all around with the fact that this is a $300 and something phone, now it's much cheaper, but during that time, it totally makes sense. And there's a lot of plastic. I mean, even in 2021, Samsung put a plastic back on their Galaxy S21. So, it kind of made sense that, the plastic is totally okay in my opinion for a phone like this. And then since then, they've completely shifted focus in with their 6A and made it, glass back, which is even better. We do have a fingerprint sensor on the back, which looks great. A single camera setup on the top left, and overall, when I look at this phone, it is still a very interesting looking phone. I mean, I like this phone a lot. It still looks very good, but it is missing some things, so keep that in mind. Like for one, there is no wireless charging on this phone, so you can't really wirelessly charge this device, which doesn't affect me too much because I don't really wireless charge my phone anyway, but just keep that in mind. Also, I don't know if this phone has any IP certification, so just keep that in the back of your mind as well. But if you're a little careful, I don't think that should be that big of a deal. But in terms of that kind of covers it up on the outside. Now, in that camera department, like I mentioned before, this phone has that 12.2 megapixel wide-angle lens. It also has an 8 megapixel wide-angle lens on the front. Now, of course, this thing is missing multiple camera sensors, which is the thing that probably ages it the most. I would love to have at least like an ultra-wide camera and a, wide-angle lens. That type of stuff really, goes a long way. But I will still take a wide-angle lens for now. It does do 4K 30 on the back, 1080p at 30 on the front. And I will say during that time, the resolutions we could film in during this moment were the same we could film it on the previous, flagship Pixels. So I'm not trying to say the previous flagship Pixels had the same camera quality as this. I do think the Pixel 4 and 4 XL did have better camera quality than this phone. But, the big problem I had with the Pixel 4 was that 1080p at the front and 4K 30 on the back, when most manufacturers during that time were already doing 4K 60 on the front and the back. I definitely do think the Pixel 4a was okay for, when it came out. And Google kind of mentioned a lot about how they use the same type of, software enhancements from their Pixel lineup to this specific 4a. And definitely from what I've seen, a lot of the photos look great. The videos look good. There's nothing I would go and brag about to people. But for a pretty cheap phone, it kind of looked really good in my opinion. So from the camera standpoint, kind of gets a thumbs up for me as well. Now from the software and the longevity portion, this is probably one of the more sadder aspects of this phone. So this phone pretty much kind of already got discontinued with software. So, in terms of Android 14. So Android 14 beta just kind of got announced. the Pixel 4a 5G is supported with Android 14. The Pixel 4a and the 4 and 4 XL are not supported on Android 14. So kind of keep that in mind. It's still going to be supported for probably another like 2 years with security updates. So I will still say for the next 2 years, you're probably okay. I think that's totally okay for the time being. But I definitely do think when you actually look at this type of device, it still has a pretty good amount of, software features inside of it, and definitely not the most, but Google's still going to be giving security updates here and there. So I think you're totally going to be okay in that standpoint as well. So from that perspective, totally gets a thumbs up. Well, it got a thumbs up from me before, and now it's not really supported, so there's not really a big point in picking it up over a 5A or 6A, but just kind of keep that in mind. Now from the performance side, we do have that Qualcomm Snapdragon 730G chipset inside, an Adreno 618 GPU, and 6GB of RAM. Now, the great thing about this phone was that they did put 6GB of RAM on this model. I thought for some reason that they were only going to put 4, which would have been actually okay. Like, that actually wouldn't have been that bad. I think the Pixel 4 has had 6GB of RAM as well, so this pretty much matched it in line with those phones. And having 6GB of RAM on such a cheap phone during that time was actually pretty cool, considering the fact that this thing was rocking stock Android, so it didn't have like a massive amount of, bloatware and like a bunch of resources in the background, pretty much sucking up things in the background. So that wasn't really, having an effect here, which was awesome. On top of that, I still think this type of phone is still a pretty good performing phone. Anytime I pick this device up from, doing basic applications or doing videos on my second channel or going on Snapchat and Instagram, those types of things, totally okay. It gives you the, performance that you pretty much expect. But even when you take it up a notch and you do slightly heavier intensive performing applications, maybe like, gaming and whatnot, I think it does do a pretty good job at some heavy intensive games. But like I said, a big thing that games have nowadays is tuning the graphic profiles. So if the game runs slow, you can just tune the graphics down, and if you're okay with it, you can actually get, have the ability of playing the same exact game, but just on lower graphics. I take a look at Genshin Impact, for example. It gives you the capability of doing that. So I do feel like the performance of this phone is good enough to kind of get into those games and tune down the graphics, and you can play a lot of games like that. There's not really a game that I can think of that will do a great job here. The only thing that would directly affect me is probably emulators, and if I'm doing like a heavy intensive emulators, I'm happy this thing has a Snapdragon chipset, over the Tensor chipset in some cases, but it's not the most overpowered thing in the world, so it's probably something to keep in mind. But the performance for the price is actually really good in my opinion. Now in the battery department, 3,140 mAh battery, and this thing at that time actually had a pretty good sized battery for being such a cheap phone. Since then, I'll definitely tell you it's definitely not that great of a battery. It's definitely not bad. Let me not say it's that great, not that great, but it is missing some things that we have nowadays, like wireless charging and reverse wireless charging, which those do fall into the battery features. So all in all, what I'll tell you is the Pixel 4a, I think is a very good phone when it first came out, and I still think it's a pretty decent phone. But I do think since then we've had like the Pixel 5a and the Pixel 6a, and considering the 6a is such a good phone, I would probably just recommend buying that device over this one. Like, I don't think I would recommend buying this one over those ones. So if you have the money, go for those, but if you still want to keep this phone, I would recommend keeping it. It's a very solid phone for sure. So that pretty much covers it up. If you have any other thoughts or questions, let me know in the comment section below. Hit the like button, that would mean so much, but definitely hit that subscribe button. More importantly than everything else, I love every single one of you guys. Hopefully I'll catch you guys in the next video. Peace out till then.